Cristiano, maricayo, aricayo. Hi, I am Eudenice Palaruan. I am the choral director of the Singapore Symphony Chorus, and together with me are representatives of the Singapore Symphony Youth Choir. I'm here to tell you about Filipino choral music, as well as debunk some of the misconceptions about our choral practices. Let's go! Let's go! Okay, let's just say false. It's been romanticized that all Filipinos can sing, but I know some Filipinos who cannot sing. Why is it true? Because every Filipino, in one way or another, has that inclination to sing in some practices. Philippine, in its history, is very ritualistic. Every Filipino would probably had some chants in their practices. Yeah? Where there is festivities, where there are fiestas, there surely are masses and gatherings where Filipinos sing. But if the question is every Filipino a chorister? Then it's false. I know many Filipinos who can sing as soloists, but they are not necessarily choristers. The choral landscape of the Philippines is ever growing. In fact, we are called now a choral singing nation. We always have a choir. Find a church, there's a choir. Find a school, there's a choir. Find a hospital, there's a choir. Name it. A bank, we have what we call bank choirs or the corporate choir. False. There are 7,107 islands. There are more than 80 languages, but actually, he said it's probably 135 different dialects. And every dialect has its own song. Many of these dialects have choral arrangements of their own folk songs. So many choirs would actually advocate their own regional folk songs. You're from the north, my tribe, for example, we sing a lot of my tribal folk songs as well. So we don't all sing Tagalog or Filipino. But since Tagalog is a national language, we all have what we call common choral favorites. Many of the languages, they have words that are, I would say, onomatopoeic in nature, which means the words imitate the object. Many of our songs sometimes imitate the sound of an object. I give you an example. Telebong, telebong, telebong. See, that sound, telebong is actually the sound of a drum. Telebong, telebong, telebong. And they made it into a song. Not only that, every region have what we call vocables. Vocables are syllables that don't have, or are words that don't have meaning. For example, salidumay. I, salidumay, salidumay, diway. And one would ask, what's the meaning of the song? No one knows. In the early years, maybe we did. Or in fact, I would say, yes, we did. We sang our choral music with piano accompaniment as is influenced by the West. And also in churches, we always sang with piano accompaniment or organ accompaniment or guitar accompaniment. But in the performance choral traditions, from the 1970s or late 70s until the current time, we always sing our music a cappella or without piano accompaniment. It's an economic thing. Not every choir can afford to buy a piano, and more so, they cannot afford to pay a pianist. However, lately we have this emergence of new type of accompaniment, that is the use of some ethnic instruments. So some choirs will now use a traditional bamboo instrument while they sing their music. But piano or keyboard accompaniment for choral music is still very irregular. I would say false. If the choral music that we're talking about is what we call the conventional choral music, then it is false because first of all, there's already a community singing practice in the Philippines even before the colonizers came. How did they do this? Well, we have what we call the oral tradition of telling stories, of telling what's happening in the environment, or even telling the practices of the people, how to fish, how to cook, how to farm. They did it in an oral tradition. Not when you say oral, not necessarily that they just talk. They say it with pitches, and sometimes they chant them. In my tribe, like they have what they call the hood hood singing. Hood hood is just like someone will tell the story. Then after that, the community will respond. Then came the Spanish. They introduced a new type of singing, a liturgical type of singing in the form of a chant, where they chanted the prayers, sometimes the psalms, and they taught them to the people. And these people were probably unlettered, and they learned the chants by memory. Every Lenten season, there is a narration of the life and suffering of Christ, but they do it 7 nights or sometimes more than 7 nights, just telling the story of the Bible until the crucifixion. And that is done by singing, not only by one singer, but by group of soloists. So that is the Passion. Now here comes the Americans. If Spanish introduced Catholicism, the Americans introduced Protestantism. And now with the Protestant religion, the hymn singing inside churches even became more regular and more established. And in their hymn books, there are 4-part harmony in those hymn books. That's how we establish now choral singing in what you call the Western style, because we follow the Western harmony. And then came the scholars, the educated musicians who studied not just the Western music, but also studied their own Filipino music or even Asian music. Many of them became musicologists, where they now recalled the indigenous practices and use them even more regularly in some compositions. That is now the current state of the Filipino choral music, where we now use our local expression, using the local dialects and even the local modes, local scales in our new choral arrangements. I say false now, but I'm probably true before. Filipino female singing is always low. It was never high. It was always low. So when they arrange traditional music or ethnic music and assign a very high pitch to the soprano, naturally we have to apply the Western technique, because it's the only technique that will make us reach those high technical passages. Now it's false. We now embrace the local sound, even the local vocal production of some of the tribes, some of the ethnic groups. And therefore, we can now sing actually in a different vocal placement, different from the Western or the European way. When you say different vocal placement, it has something to do with the doming of the inner part of the upper apparatus or the head. In the Western type of singing, we always make use of the upper palate, the head tone, or maybe even the chest tone, or maybe what we call now the round vowel. But in the Asian or even Filipino vocal production, it's actually quite flat. You sometimes produce this type of sound. So if I will sing, the coconut nut is a giant nut. If you eat too much, you get very fat. Now the coconut. Yeah, I don't sing that way, right? Sometimes we even teach our students when they sing Filipino indigenous vocal music. We tell them, try to sing it as if you have a tobacco in your mouth. Mama yoga kun, mama yoga kun, mama yoga kun, mama yoga kun. Whereas before they probably sang mama yoga kun, mama, which is actually very not quite embraced now. And before probably it was good, but now we say, oh, that's not the way we should sing our local music. I hope you learn something about Filipino choral music. Thank you for watching. There are still many things to learn. Every time you listen to Filipino choral music, you're not just listening to beautiful voices, you're listening to history.